Welcome back, everybody. And we are so thrilled to continue this fantastic day with another group of rather remarkable artists. To give you a little background on our next panel, our publishing ecosystem is in need of attention as local journalism falters, media consolidation intensifies, and social media contributes to the spread of disinformation, collectively undermining the factual basis upon which argument depends. The veracity of online outlets can be hard to establish. The cultural filtration systems we rely on to evaluate sources will develop, but they will take time. For now, existing publications and institutions must step in to underscore and support our shared democratic values. Freedom of expression for artists working within mainstream publishing will be explored by D.B. Dowd, who will chair this discussion with our three exceptional illustrators, and I will just introduce them briefly and turn the program over to Douglas. Rudy Gutierrez is an illustrator and educator born in the Bronx, New York, of Puerto Rican heritage, and he's raised in Teaneck, New Jersey. He's been a professor of illustration at Pratt Institute, where he has taught since 1990, and his work has appeared in films and performances, on US postage stamps, LP and CD covers, posters, and so much more. His artwork for Santana's Shaman was used as a set design at the 2002 Super Bowl halftime show, and his paintings have been commissioned for Chasing Train, the John Coltrane documentary. His art is included in the collections of musical icons Carlos Santana, Clive Davis, and Wayne Shorter, and his children's books have earned many awards, including a Caldecott Honor Award. Rudy's recent poster, Sacred Scream, Humanity Not Politics, was one of 6 works that we were very fortunate to commission by the Norman Rockwell Museum prior to the 2020 election to help inspire people to vote. Anita Kunz has been appointed an Officer of the Order of Canada, Canada's highest civilian honor. Her work has been published regularly in Time, Rolling Stone, Vanity Fair, The New Yorker, The New York Times, and many others, and she has illustrated more than 50 book jacket covers. Anita teaches and lectures at universities and institutions internationally, and we are honored to feature Anita's work as part of the permanent collection of the Norman Rockwell Museum. We were also so pleased to feature her poster illustration, Every Vote Counts, in the museum's Unity project, which we believe hopefully did help to get out the vote. Nora Krug is a German-American author and illustrator whose drawings and visual narratives have appeared in the New York Times, The Guardian, Le Monde, A Public Space, and in several anthologies. Her visual memoir, Belonging, A German Reckons with History and Home, was chosen as a best book of the year by the New York Times, The Guardian, NPR, Kirkus Review, the San Francisco Chronicle, the Boston Globe, and that really just scratches the surface. Her visual biography, Kamikaze, about a surviving Japanese World War II pilot, was included in Houghton Mifflin's Best American Comics and Best Non-Required Reading. And her animations have been shown at the Sundance Film Festival. Nora is Associate Professor of Illustration at Parsons School of Design in New York. Thank you to all of our panelists. And with that, I turn it over to Douglas, our moderator.
Thank you, Stephanie. And thanks to Anita, Rudy, and Nora for being with us. We're gonna get right to this. It's clear that the converging issues, building on our last panel, have something to do with publishing and speech and professionalism and citizenship. And our panelists are all in the mix in those subjects. So each of our panelists will make a presentation starting with Anita, and then we we'll have a little bit of a moderated discussion as with the last panel. So Anita, you're up.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I mean, I just want to say how inspiring that last panel discussion was. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Good. Okay, I'm just gonna go directly to the work. Okay. Okay, I've been very fortunate to have been able to work in the mainstream media for almost 4 decades, actually 4 decades. And I think, if we're going to be talking about the mainstream media, I think we also need to talk about the way things used to be versus the way things are now. I kind of added these slides late last night because of, particularly because of Steve Heller's amazing talk. I was always so inspired by the work of Artsy Bischoff and Schick, and also my great hero, Suko, Ralph Steadman, Russell Mills, people like that. But so this is the kind of work that I was doing way back then. This was about a Nazi war criminal they found living in Toronto quietly. And you can absolutely see the influences. I think I did this when I was 25 years old, and the idea that I was given complete freedom, complete creative freedom to do this incredible book, back then, kind of speaks to the kind of autonomy that illustrators used to have, and I think we have a lot less now. This was something I did for the great art director Fred Woodward about the cocaine trade between North and South America. And I think one of the most important things to talk about when you talk about working for the mainstream media is a relationship with an art director. And it can't happen, we can't have respect and autonomy between artist and the audience without having an incredible art director that really allows illustration to flourish. And I just want to give a shout out to some of the great art directors I worked with: Louis Fishoff, Fred Woodward, Steve Heller, of course, Arthur Hochstein, Gail Anderson, and Françoise Moulineau. So this is the kind of thing that I used to do for decades, political satire in mainstream publications. Here's Nixon as the emperor without clothes, Ronald Reagan around the time of the Iran-Contra scandal, trading arms for hostages. I think I've done pretty much all the presidents since Carter, and there was never any problem with this. I mean, there was, I wonder if a lot of this stuff would be published now, maybe, I don't know. Currently, I'm doing as much work as I possibly can for Françoise Mouly, because this is what I'm finding now is the covers for the New Yorker. I mean, they're few and far between, but the ability to self-generate the ideas and make images about things that I'm really concerned about. There aren't that many mainstream publications, and we can talk about this later, but I'm not finding that many anymore where I can consistently do this kind of work anymore. So this was when the US invaded Iraq. And this was at the end of Bill Clinton's presidency. I mean, I sort of recall, some of these ideas were just kind of sweet and charming, and this is called Happy Trails. But there was also, I was also allowed to do images that were things that I was very concerned about: the privatization of water, probably what will be the next thing next to oil, over which there will be bloodshed. So as far as the mainstream media goes, this is kind of my sort of go-to for submitting ideas now. This one, I wanted to do something about how women feel we need to, show ourselves in varying, all the different cultures. I've always wanted to try and do images that have a deeper meaning. This was for I think the week after July 4th. And I just wanted to do kind of a little reminder that, New York was founded on the backs of Indigenous people. So there's always, I mean, for me, ever since I was a kid, my uncle was an illustrator, And from him, his motto was art for education. And from him, I learned that art could be actually of service, and it could provide some meaning and at least some dialogue in the culture. This is called Silent Night, Endless Fight, about the soldiers who, have to do endless tours of duty. And of course, this is called Dangerous Toys. The great thing about being able to work with Francoise is, and I don't, honestly, I don't know whether she has the final say. I suspect not. I suspect the editor does. And I think one of the things that I've certainly been noticing over the years is that art directors seem to have far less say than editors do. So I think it's a bit problematic when editors start art directing. But anyway, that's my personal beef. Oh, wait, something just happened here. Okay. Well, do we remember intelligence, grace, integrity, compassion, complete sentences? I haven't done too many pictures of what's his name, but this is one that I did that was based on the great George Lois Esquire cover called Media Monster. And I'm finding that the older I get, the more I want to do self-generated work, because the idea of sitting around waiting for the phone to ring with the perfect job is not something I'm willing, or I have the patience to do anymore. So I've done a lot of posters these were for the Women's March. This is something I did for the Wolfsonian that Steve Heller was responsible for. So that was a series of 3 posters. And then I work with a Turkish organization out of Istanbul, and it's actually a cartoon competition. But what they really try to do is build dormitories in the country for girls, so that the parents will let the girls go to school, so that they're not married off at a very early age. I've always been a big supporter of artists' rights and that we're paid properly and all that stuff. But I think just as important is that we have a voice in the culture, and money is great. And of course we have to pay our bills, but our voices are so critical and so important, and we have such a great responsibility to use them wisely. This is the Mirko Ilic tolerance show that's going around Europe right now. So one thing that I've started to do is I started to do a lot of personal work. This is a book that will be released by Fantagraphics in August, and it's really another history of art. I always was very aware when I was an artist, a young artist, or even before that in art school, that it didn't seem that the history of art was my history. It was a different history. And so I came up with the idea to sort of revisit a lot of works of art as if they had been done by a secular female, me. So I did, a whole bunch of paintings, and I'm very lucky that I was able to sell this to Fantagraphics. And the other thing I did was that on the inside, I wrote the biographies of these men, but I changed the pronoun to women. And it was amazing how differently it read. You realize that it would never have happened. So that it was a really interesting way to make a point. And this is my last slide. This is my COVID project. One thing that I've always wanted to do, but I've never been able to, find the time, is to do portraits of women I admire, and women who, once I started doing the research, I realized I'd never even heard of half of these women. And I believe that they should be honored. I believe everyone should know their names. And this is 6, I've done 180 so far. And the longer the lockdown goes on, the more I'll be able to do. But this, I shopped this around, and I'm so grateful that it was bought. And this, a book will be out in November of this series. And, we're trying to make it as accessible and joyous and a celebration of women as we possibly can, making sure that absolutely everything is about it is accurate. And anyway, yeah, I've got a great publisher, and I don't know if I can talk about it yet, but I'm thrilled to be able to do this. And this could probably be my project for the rest of my life. But anyway, and that's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, Rudy, you're up.
All right. First of all, thanks for having me, and thank you to all the people who've showed up to listen to us. Incredible. I like to tell this story about watching Bob Marley get interviewed, right? And we have a cameraman that's following him. And, you know, Bob is about, I don't know, 5'3", 5'4", you know, short stature, but a giant, you know? He's walking up the stairs onto the stage, and the interviewer is asking him, as a camera pans the audience, and there's probably 100,000 or more people waiting for this little dude to get up there and do his thing, you know? And so the interviewer asks him, so Bob, what are you thinking when you go to play, you know? And Bob replied, well, you know, I'm not going to play. I don't go to play. And I said, yeah, Bob, I hear you. That's what it's about. You know, so what is he talking about? For me, it's, you know, he said, I go to conquer. I go to conquer. And for me, he's conquering complacency, ignorance, and most of all, fear. You know, and look at where fear has us in this country right now. You know, for me, doing art is really about uplifting and inspiring, but also with the highest part being maybe I can humbly speak for people who don't have a voice. You know, it's about the responsibility of truth in terms of our vision, you know, and that truth filters through my lens as a person of color, more specifically, as someone with Puerto Rican descent who acknowledges my African and indigenous blood. So all of that goes into who I am and what I do with no separation. This first piece, and I'm just gonna show a few slides. I'm not gonna speak that much because I have a 6-minute slide video, which I think will say what I need to say with some music. Music is a big influence on me. We the people, you know, it's about inclusion. It's about being able to walk through that front door. Look at the events of January 6th, the atrocious events, and how people could walk through that front door. That's incredible to me. I would not have been allowed. And I'm light-skinned Puerto Rican. Imagine a darker skinned Puerto Rican. I look at the whole industry and I think about, you know, and we're here to talk about mainstream, you know, marketing as, you know, as opposed to personal work, that kind of thing. And we all do all of it, you know, but mainstream marketing or mainstream clients, which I've done, you know, certainly a lot of editorial work for newspapers and magazines, that kind of thing. Really, I can attribute that to making me get even more personal with the work, because I felt like I was going through the side door very often. And by that, I mean, you know, I was doing a lot of general media work, and unfortunately, I would get called typically to do, and I say in quotes, Hispanic subject matter, you know, and my thinking on that is like, no, that's not my panic, that's his, you know, and I realized I had to start making changes that exemplified exactly who I am, what I want to say, and let the chips fall where they will, you know. And I started doing more personal work, and with no regard to who was going to hire me. Yes, I lost clients, but I gained other clients. And I also found that I had a better ability to speak my truth through my lens. So it behooves me or disturbs me actually when I see a history of illustration and we get to the, the area where we're going to talk about politics or social issues, and I rarely see a brown or Black artist for the kind of work that they do and we do. And, it's incredible that our pain is being portrayed by someone else, and I see this often. Again, it's that side door. So, and don't get me wrong, I've had the pleasure of working in this, huge market and, being in it, but some of the realities are still there, they're still there, so, and I'm talking literally as well, in the days when we used to deliver work, I'd show up at the front desk and be sent to the freight elevator. And, I'm like, no, I'm here to see an art director, so it's a constant fight, constant, it's constantly fighting privilege, desecration of culture, etc. I don't see enough of us being used to portray this evil, to portray this pain, and there are great people who are not people of color who are doing it, but there are others who are like Pat Boone doing Little Richard, I mean, come on, Mick Jagger doing Muddy Waters. Let's get pure. Let's tell the truth, And I put this slide just to be inclusive of another part of me, which is, doing album covers. I do children's books. I do book covers. But the thread is always culture and social justice. So, yeah, I can show a bunch of social justice pieces, but I think it's also important to talk about the idea of culture as our power base. So whatever I do, it's always going to be inclusive of culture, whether it's a children's book, or a book cover or an album cover. That's really what's important to me. And the other reality is that, yeah, I know that I've given up certain marketplaces, and that's okay. Again, it's for me about whether I'm speaking to a mass audience or a small audience, it's speaking for my people and coming from my lens. I was honored to be asked to do this by the Norman Rockwell Museum. And it was, it had to do with getting the vote out. And I would not have been interested in voting just for the sake of voting, unless I could be inclusive of the atrocities going on and one way of combating it, which is voting. And this is called Sacred Scream. And it's a scream that many people of color have, that's just not heard. Yeah, it's time to clean up this mess, but that's going to be difficult, does cleaning up this mess mean sweeping these people back under rocks? Or does it mean changing people's hearts and spirits, which is going to take a very long time? But it is time. So that brings me to this little slide video. It's for a song called Revolution by my wife, DK Dyson, who's a huge inspiration to me, has always been. Supreme artist, supreme songwriter and musician. It's gonna start out with a little invocation, which is inclusive of God, spirit, culture, calling on the spirits, indigenous spirits, African spirits, and then going to the streets and talking about revolution and the whole idea of there needs to be a revolution of the mind.
Kali durge Every time I walk down my block, every second ticking on my clock. I made it back from yesterday, no guarantees I'm here to stay. Revolution, right here, right now. Tear gas and flashing vans, dead brown children, half-broke hands, blasting bags, burn up spoons, pissed up hallways, gunshot wounds. Revolution, right here, right now. Let me tell you how. Awake, arise, see past the lies. Warriors act, I got your back. Hey, yeah, yeah, They show that criminals all look the same. Tough brown faces, Spanish names. Lazy leaders, pass the buck. Screw 'em, kill 'em, lock 'em up. Revolution, right here, right now. Every time I walk down my block, every second ticking on my clock. At my front and at my back, for all I need and lack. A revolution, right here. Oh, let me tell you how. Awake, arise, see past the lies. Oh, warriors act, I got your back. Hey, yeah, yeah. Calling for a revolution. It starts in your mind, baby. Revolution. Revolution. It starts in your Revolution. It starts in your mind.
Yeah, it starts in your mind, indeed. That's the music of D.K. Dyson, my wife. One thing to remember is when I come through that door, even if it's the side door, even if it's the damn side door, I never, ever come alone. I come with my ancestors, my mother, my father, my brother. All of them are with me, my uncle, you know, and they allow me to speak for them. And that's what I find so important. You know, I find that art is magic. I find that it inspires. It's a damn weapon. It's medicine used to heal soul wounds. And you know what? If it makes one not feel alone in his or her visions, or it serves as transportation to a higher self, and I do believe that it does, then that's where I live. You know, that's where I live. And thank you for inviting me to step in this particular front door. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Rudy.
You're welcome.
That video is extraordinary.
Thank you. inspired by the music.
That, well, the audio visual word image is just amazing. Just amazing.
Thank you.
All
And
right.
I just wanted to say one more thing in
Yes.
conjunction with what I was saying, and that is, you know, when we do these history of illustration things, it's real important not to forget, you know, our Black artists, brown artists who are out in the streets. You know, I grew up coming of age as a teenager between the 60s and the 70s and the civil rights movement and the social movements, the hippie movement, Black Panther movement, AIM, the Young Lords. And they all had artists who were doing their thing, but it wasn't on this grand scale where aesthetics were judged by someone else, but more so by the people who they were required to touch. It was an interesting conversation before where we were talking about what's good art. You know, well, let's really talk about that. Doesn't it get down to the aim of it and how that aim is satisfied? You know, so, you know, I beg people, don't forget the artists who were handing this stuff out in the streets, touching people on the spot, painting signs. We're talking about Emory Douglas of the Black Panther movement, Tom Feelings, who was doing it in children's books and won the first African-American to win the Caldecott Award, Jim Seytu Dyson, my brother-in-law, who was part of the Black Panther movement doing art. So don't forget us. Thank you.
Well, I want to underscore that the history of illustration it's improving, but it has been a woefully underdeveloped field, and it's sort of been the history of style.
Sure.
And a lot of people are doing good work, and many of them are actually present today. And we collectively have a lot of work to do. The history of graphic design has a lot of work to do, and the points you're making are 100% accurate and very pressing. Steve Heller made a comment in the chat I just want to pull up. Rudy, you're so eloquent and moving on the core paradox about political art, specifically art in general. The sense that in the 21st century, prejudice in art has been erased is so wrong, and it has just been camouflaged by wishful thinking. So
Absolutely. And it's our responsibility to fill that vacuum that's made by politics and religion. Where they fall short, the truth is on us.
Rudy, I'll just jump in to mention that this important point that you bring forward is also one that is really closely under discussion at museums right now throughout the nation and the world.
Absolutely.
And I think that's been a very important advancement in thinking, and hopefully it will help to move those ideas forward. Thank you for that exceptional presentation.
Thank you, and thank you for the support that you've shown as the Norman Rockwell Museum, absolutely.
our last panelist is Nora. And Nora, you have the floor.
Thank you so much to everyone organizing this. It's an honor to be here. Thank you to the two panelists for all this inspirational work and the conversations we just had, which are very, very, very important. So I'm going to talk briefly about two different projects that I've recently been working on. One that was published in 2018, which is the one featured on the screen, called Belonging, A German Reckons with History and Home, published by Scribner, and also the current project I'm working on that is going to be published this year by 10 Speed Press. Belonging is a 280-page, fully illustrated visual memoir about World War II and my own German family history. Oops. The atrocities that my country, Germany, committed during World War II obviously cast a long shadow all throughout my childhood. And my years as a teenager were accompanied by a tremendous sense of inherited guilt. But even though we learned a lot about the Holocaust in school, the page on the right, on the left is actually an excerpt of a speech by Adolf Hitler that I had to analyze as a teenager in school. Even though we learned so much about the Holocaust in school, our guilt grew into a somewhat abstract guilt, and conversations about what happened in our own families remained largely non-existent. And by the time I learned about the Holocaust, all my grandparents had died, and I felt that I had missed my chance to ask them directly about their lives under the Nazi regime. And so my guilt and the gaping hole that was my family's history left me with a feeling of emotional paralysis, and connected to that a sense of cultural disorientation, which I think a lot of Germans still feel today, because our sense of national identity is still very deeply tied to the Nazis' atrocities. And as a German living abroad for 20 years, I've often been aware that my accent alone can evoke the memory of the Nazis' crimes. And living as a German amongst non-Germans has also grown my urge over the years to confront my own family's history within the bigger framework of German history from a new perspective. And I felt a stronger urge to ask those questions that I had never had a chance to ask before. So through a combination of short comics and full-page illustrations, as well as photographs, the book follows my journey as I seek out lost relatives in the village where my father was from, pictured on the right page. Consult archives for evidence, for any evidence about my family's life under the Nazi regime. And the book also follows, in particular, the lives of two people, my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, pictured on the left, who was a driving teacher during the war and also a Nazi party member, which is something that my family only found out while I was doing the research on the book. And my paternal uncle, who died as an SS soldier in Italy at age 19, and whose grave we discovered by sheer coincidence as a family during a family vacation in Italy when I was a child, because his remains were buried there. Through this visual memoir, I hoped to gain a clearer understanding of the effect that war has over generations, and the effect that it had on my family, the personal effect it has, war and history has on lives every day and in every country, really. But it also was an opportunity for me to try and understand what German cultural identity means to me, and how it can be understood both on a personal and a collective level. And this is a question that has still remained vague and obscure and elusive to me. Is there really such a thing as cultural identity? Is it something that's static, or does it evolve continuously? How can we portray this idea of cultural identity and the histories that come with that as artists? The second book I want to talk about is the book I'm currently working on. It's called On Tyranny. It's written by the wonderful American historian Timothy Snyder. This is the original edition that was published, I believe, in 2016, right after the elections. And it is a highly, highly relevant book about what's going on in America today. Very relevant to all of the things that basically everybody who spoke today has talked about. So it's called On Tyranny, 20 Lessons from the 20th Century. And as the title suggests, it is a book that talks about how we can learn from 20th century history, what we can take from that, and how we can avoid those things that happened during those horrific times under various regimes will never happen again. And the book is divided into 20 chapters that are 20 suggestions or 20 notions that we need to really be aware of and be sensitive towards in order to recognize the beginnings of tyranny so that we can learn how to interfere, basically. To me, it was a wonderful project to work on because, first of all, I admire Timothy's work, and for those of you who are interested, he has an article in today's New York Times Magazine about what's currently going on, and also because it represented an opportunity to continue this endeavor of asking how the personal and the political intersect, and what is our responsibility as human beings, as citizens, but also as artists in shaping political notions and in providing more complex insights into history and what's going on presently in the world. And also into how war and conflict can impact our thinking today, how our experience with war and conflict. So I'm going to show a few examples from this book. This speaks specifically to the history of the Nazi regime and the idea of us being spectators and bystanders as the Jewish population basically disappeared. This is a chapter about investigating and the importance of investigating facts, of believing in facts and in truth. The picture on the right talks about the idea of indifference. So this was my idea of portraying the sense of looking away, or there's always this idea of when to look and when not to look, and that's a personal choice, and that it is obviously our responsibility to look and to witness. And I think images in the history of illustration, obviously as Steve Heller showed yesterday, and DB also has been showing a lot in his talks, it is our responsibility as illustrators to witness, to see ourselves as witnesses, and to show truth, basically. There's also a chapter on deception and alternative truths and conspiracy theories. I had a lot of fun illustrating that because it's so bizarre and outworldish. I don't know if that's a word. So these 2 pages are from that chapter. Snyder talks about shamanistic incantation, the idea of, which is something that Adolf Hitler did and Donald Trump did as well, of constantly repeating the same falsehoods over and over again, and also assigning particular names and words to those, terms like crooked Hillary, that he just repeated over and over again until those words basically sank into people's brain, and they became just the fabric of everyday understanding of who Hillary Clinton is, and transformed her in the minds of people. So that's the power of shamanistic incantation, which I try to portray through having this shifting, transformation that's going on in this female character on the page on the right. He also talks about magical thinking, the idea that Donald Trump presented, possibilities that don't actually exist by inflating lies. So in addition to just coming up with lies, also inflating ideas, making them seem grander than they are. And another mode he talks about is the idea of misplaced faith, putting yourself as a tyrant into a kind of a space that's almost godlike. So that's what the page on the right-hand side symbolizes. He quotes several great people in the book, and there's one moment in the book talking about Ionesco, the Romanian playwright, and his observing how friends around him turned into Nazis. And so I created this upside down image on the left page, showing a university professor. You see, hopefully you can see that based on the way I designed the hat. But then when you turn around the book, which I can't do now because I don't want to turn around my computer, the face turns into that of a Nazi wearing a Nazi uniform. And then on the right-hand page, Timothy talks about propaganda. I don't have to explain what it is. We've heard about it a lot today, but I chose, so my goal for the whole book was to try to find images that don't directly turn his ideas, one-on-one, translate them one-on-one. So I didn't want to show an example of propaganda on this page, but I thought about how propaganda could be expressed in a different way, for instance, in this case, by showing a shadow figure. So somebody making something else of something that is really very harmless. I think that's all for my images. Yeah, we wanted to talk a little bit, we were asked to also talk about the relationship between publishers or clients and our work as illustrators. And I can say that at least with these two projects, I've been incredibly lucky, both with my publishers and editors and the author, Timothy, that I've been given just so much support. I mean, obviously the whole idea of these books was to question common notions of history and truth, and to try to shed a more critical viewpoint on how people think about history and what's going on presently in this country and in the world. And so obviously the goal of these projects was to ask critical questions. So I've been very, very lucky to have been working with authors, editors, and publishers who supported that idea.
So I have a few questions, but I want to actually get to a question from the Q&A from my colleague John Hendricks. John asks, all three of you, given the recent news about Simon & Schuster dropping Josh Hawley's book, how do those of you who work in Big Five publishing think about the responsibility of what else your publisher has in their catalog? Do you feel, just extending that, I mean, one of the questions that I'm going to ask as a follow-up is sort of like, how do you say, what are the terms or under the conditions under which you say no to a project? But taking a step back from that, John's question is a little more precise. Do you feel accountable in choosing to work for a publisher, given whatever other things they're issuing, and given the consolidation of publishing, that's a big landscape.
I mean, I think as Rudy indicated earlier too, obviously there's no publisher that does not have a history of publishing questionable books, and a lot of publishers are only beginning now to develop a consciousness, to be more inclusive, but also exclusive of those who, are problematic. And so I think for me personally, obviously I would never publish a book with a publisher who has a strong history of publishing questionable content. But I would hope to be published by people whose efforts are going towards the right direction. But I don't know how possible it would be. Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question because it puts the responsibility on us too as co-authors. But I don't know. I mean, it's a very complex question because if you publish a book that actually tries to help with the effort of breaking down these misconceptions, that will also help the publisher change their perspective. So, I think it's a complex question, and I don't know the answer.
Yeah, it truly is. I think back to when South Africa, and had their system of apartheid, and how they were trying to get various artists to go there and athletes. And so many turned them down and others, didn't. And they had excuses that, hey, they're going to be able to see who we are, I think it's a one-on-one basis, depending on who the publisher is or who the so-called client is. I think you have to explore it on a single basis. I applauded the people who refused, turned down millions to go to South Africa to play tennis, like John McEnroe or Arthur Ashe. I mean, there were all kinds of enticing situations, and they had the morality, and it really does get down to morality and humanity. But again, on a one-on-one basis, because who's deciding what's good and evil, within, let's say, a publisher. So, I mean, you got to be real careful with that. I know that I've personally turned down jobs, when I very much needed the money. One of them was the NRA contacting me. Now, I didn't care what the article was, it just wasn't going to happen. They offered X amount of dollars. They came back a month later after I turned it down, offered more money to do another article. And what I realized is that I would be used for their agenda. I mean, that's all that was about. And the arrogance that they could just buy me, so I refused, Now, there are some situations where you go, okay, what's the trade-off? There was no trade-off there. Sometimes there is a trade-off in terms of like, okay, can I say X, Y, Z? And is that going to be of assistance? And am I voicing the concerns of the responsibility that I have to people of color, let's say? It's complicated, like Nora says. It really is. And it's just a one-on-one basis.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. And, like I said earlier, sort of with this vast audience that we have, like if we're in any, if so many people buy your book, or if you're in a magazine or whatever, it does come with great responsibility. And I think we all have our own particular line in the sand. And that it has to do with what you can sleep with, like what can I sleep at night, honestly. I've certainly turned down a lot of work, and I've had some curious arguments with people who literally told me I was crazy, and but can I sleep, can I sleep at night? No. So I think one of the great things, one of the very positive things about being a freelance illustrator is that you can turn down work. If we were working, with for somebody else, that would be much more difficult, and that would be a much bigger sacrifice, right? But I mean, turning down the occasional job because it's just you just can't bring yourself to do it, I think is something that's pretty normal for people who freelance. I mean, we can design our own careers, it's not always easy, but it's, like we get to figure out who we want to work, because context is just as important as what you're doing, as the image and what you're trying to say. It's context.
Sure.
So if there's another, maybe another leg on that stool, there's the work that you do, there's the work that a publisher issues, whether or not that publisher has hired you as a freelancer or is issuing your project. The third element is audience. And what kind of experiences have you had through your audience that maybe shape or inflect your thinking about what you do, to give you pause, or for that matter, give you the heads up that, like, yeah, I'm on the right track here. If I'm irritating the right people, maybe that's good.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just gonna, unfortunately right now, no matter what I say, half the people are not gonna like it. I mean, the country is so divided. There's no way that you can make everyone happy. So the best you can do is your best.
Yeah, the fear that I have is that I'm just always preaching to the choir. That kind of hurts.
Yeah, in my case, because I've done, I mean, even before the two books that I've just talked about, I've done work on war. And I noticed that when you do work on war from the perspective that's not the familiar perspective, people often have a problem with it because they're not used to a story told from the perspective of a kamikaze pilot, for instance, or there's not so much understanding that, you know, not every kamikaze pilot actually wanted to fight in the war, or, you know, and with the German book too, the book about German, you know, my German experience, I think my biggest concern was that I would offend people who suffered under the regime by talking about a German perspective, even though the perspective was one of, you know, shame and critical confrontation. And I mean, I can't say I was pleased, but after my book came out, the opposite was actually true, that the comments I got, you know, few comments I got that were critical were from those who felt that I was dragging Germany through the dirt, both from America and from Germany, feeling that, you know, the whole guilt thing should stop. We shouldn't feel guilty anymore. We should leave the past behind. And then there was something posted on a white supremacist website about my book. You know, why do Germans still feel like this if the men, aka US soldiers who raped the German women, are still walking around free? And so, you know, I was glad that the criticism came from that end, because I think obviously for all of us, that's true, that if you create work that, you know, makes people think, you know, then that's not, I mean, that's probably a good thing. I mean, obviously it has to make them think in the right direction.
So one thing that's actually really striking listening to the three of you talk, and I guess I didn't quite see this coming, and but each of you in a very specific way have spoken about history, have spoken about the way the past is constructed and shaped and presented. And I wonder if, I invite you to talk a little more about that in the context of your particular projects, but I'm also curious to know, why do you think that's important now? Like, why is that happening? Because it doesn't seem coincidental. Why?
I think because of the simple lack of historical exclusion, at least from my point of view. You know, it's ironic, honestly, that I'm even sitting here at the Norman Rockwell Museum. And the reason I say that is because, and I'll give you a little quick story, but some of us used to be invited to the Syracuse graduate program, and Anita certainly was one. And you might have been there this day, Anita, I'm not sure. But I was sitting in the front row with Mary Tinkelman, who I dearly loved. And he was the head of the program. And he was showing a film on the life of Norman Rockwell. So I remember the commentator saying that Norman Rockwell represented American art. He was America's artist. And I sat there, and Mary's sitting right next to me, and I go, Mary, that's bullshit, you know? And so Mary looks at me astounded, like, what did you say? I go, I no disrespect to Norman Rockwell and what he did represent, and certainly his technical skills, but in my growing up, he meant nothing to me, nothing, you know? So Mary, who's the constant educator, says, Rudy, okay, after the film's over, I want you to address the audience, you know? So, which I did. And the first question I asked Mary was, and he's sitting in the front row with this little grin, you know, because he's put me on the spot now. And I look at Mary and I go, Mary, you, as a Jew growing up in Brooklyn, are you telling me you related to the art of Norman Rockwell? And he looks at me and he goes, no, I didn't. And I'm like, okay, case closed. Of course, I went and spoke a little bit more. But what astounded me was afterwards, the people who came up to me and told me, thank you for saying that, you know? And so it's with this sense of responsibility that we proceed, you know?
Well said.
Thank you.
And I will say, in Rockwell's defense,
Mhm.
I mean, a lot of having spent some time looking and thinking about this, so much of that was the editorial policy of the Saturday Evening Post.
Absolutely, I agree.
Norman Rockwell was selling magazines, and so, you know, the constraints on the representation of African Americans in the Post were stringent.
Right.
And which is part of why he ended up working for Look. But the question really isn't about any individual person's motivations. The question is about how does the society structure its representations and who's in and who's out.
Right.
And that's the heart of your point.
I totally agree. It's how he was used, you know, in a manner of speaking. Yeah.
Anita, can you talk a little more about your women's history of art? I think that's.
Well, I mean, you know, that's, you know, that sort of goes to history too. But I mean, it's interesting what, you know, what Rudy said. I mean, I grew up I'm Canadian. I grew up in Canada. And so I was always looking to Europe. I didn't have that much access to American art. So that's what I meant by that's not really my history. And I remember teaching at some American schools and I was like, oh, I never heard of this guy. You know, I felt really bad because I didn't hear, I had never heard of half of these artists. I shouldn't say that. Anyway, but yeah, no, I mean, I think that we have a responsibility to try and right wrongs that have been perpetuated throughout history. Certainly it's a way to learn. I mean, you know, I've been sort of criticized for comparing, you know, Trump to Hitler, and it's a very shallow thing to sort of to be angry about that. But if you look at how he came to power, that's what's interesting, and that's what, you know. I mean, I'm from German heritage too. I totally. I mean, I have chills when I read Nora's book because it so relates to me, you know. I think it's such an important book, Nora, both of them, and I can't wait to the next one. But you know, we have a responsibility to you know, to never have certain things happen again. We can't allow it. We can't allow it. Our civilization will collapse, and civilizations have collapsed before. And I don't want to sound alarmist, but we also have climate change happening, and you know, we need to start figuring this stuff out. And I think the best way to try and figure out, well, why are we here is how the hell did we get here, and how can we, you know, and I don't know. I mean, I love Sukkot so much, and I'm sort of sad to hear that she's kind of given up, and I feel that way sometimes too, and I don't want to. But anyway, I think that's a long answer to the question of how history is important, and it is.
Yeah, I think it's also the most natural thing is to understand that we are who we are because of what was before. I think there's so little consciousness about this, such short-sightedness in both directions, you know, thinking of climate change too, in terms of the future, but also the past, you know, that our societies are built upon what was before. I mean, it's so evident. Genetically, we are who we are because of who was there before. We are the past, and we have to therefore continuously confront it. It doesn't have to be with shame, but it has to be with responsibility. And yeah, again, I think as artists, that's our responsibility. But I think what we also need to understand, and Timothy Snyder writes about this too, is that history doesn't repeat itself. So it's not like, you know, everything will happen again the way it happened before. I agree with Anita that, you know, Trump, there are many parallels to German history. But if we assume that history repeats itself, we make the wrong conclusions about new tyrants. And if we make wrong conclusions, we make wrong decisions in order to stop them in their tracks. So history doesn't repeat itself, but we have to learn from it because we are made of it and we have a responsibility going forward.
I think that's an incredible thought to end the conversation on. What an amazing panel. It's incredibly inspiring. I just want to invite one last question. And if any of our previous panelists would want to come on, Robert or Chris, Sue, and Ryan, if you want to pop on. One question that's been coming up quite a bit is, you know, you've all done such exceptional work, and what is feeling like it's next for you? What's that next thing that's going to be really satisfying? That's coming up quite a few times in the questions. Anybody want to talk about that?
Do
Well,
you mean projects? Do you mean book projects or
It
what?
seems like, yes. I mean, Anita, you certainly talked about your project on important historical women, but I think people are anxious to know what else is coming.
Well, for me, I could spend the rest of my life doing this because I've only done 180. You know, there are thousands. So, I mean, you know, this while we're in lockdown, certainly I'm going to keep doing this. So, what about you, Nora and Rudy?
for me, it's kind of a new direction. Collaborating with my wife, DK Dyson, we've collaborated, you know, in terms of me doing album covers for her or backdrops at CBGBs and things like that. But now we're in the process of signing a deal to do a children's book together. So it's going to be another whole outlet for us as a combined power, hopefully, to say the things we need to say. And that excites me big time.
That is exciting. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else? No, Nora?
I've already talked enough about my new book, I think. And I think what I'll do after that will be, again, a continuation of, you know, thinking about history and how it informs us and, you know, serving basically as a role, in the role as an illustrator in communicating those ideas.
Great. Robert?
I've been vowing to do an adaptation of Moby Dick, which I think I'll finally do. But I keep putting it off because the world is getting in the way. And it's easier than facing it. So I'll probably face that next.
Well, I really want to see that.
Thank
Ryan?
you.
Well, I mean, this discussion of history interests me a lot in the sense of trying to find material that's lost, voices that are lost, work that should be republished or even published for the first time that where the author or artist is no longer alive. I mean, I feel a need to try to spotlight important conversations that have been lost in that historical timeline. I mean, I've been, for the longest time now, publishing work that's on commission, new work, and shaping that with the artists into publications. But recently I've been delving into a lot of archives from estates and looking at work where I feel it's still relevant and it should be brought back out. So I'm always looking for suggestions. I'm always looking for work that might have been lost. And I would like to support that.
That's great. That's a wonderful curatorial perspective too. And Douglas?
You know, I'm working on a book of essays on American illustration and cartooning, but I'm also I'm beginning to shape an illustrated memoir of growing up in the post-war United States and processing what has happened the last 4 years and the way that grew out of a set of falsely reassuring historical representations that we all swallowed, or not all of us, but some of us swallowed and have to be spat out.
Great, thank you. You know, there's a comment in the chat from Veronica, and she says, art and stories shape our collective understanding. And I think the work that you are all doing in such extraordinary ways is so helpful in that. So thank you for raising your voices through your work. I think you're helping us to make sense of oftentimes what seems like senseless circumstances. And our conversation today was so enlightening. Thank you for taking the time to be with us. And thank you to our audience. It was really wonderful to have you here. Please do visit nrm.org for future events and conversations. And we hope you stay well and that we'll see you soon. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you all.